friends, welcome to my channel. I am Katerina from the Evolution of Stitches, and this is the first video of my knitting series. So I'm going to begin by showing you how to cast on your stitches on your needle in order to begin your knitting project. I'm going to use an acrylic yarn, but of course you can use any yarn you like and the appropriate size for your needle. To find the right size for your knitting needles, please check the label of your yarn. So, for example, on this label you can see that I should use a pair of 5 or 6 knitting needles. Don't get confused by the size you can see engraved on my needles. This differs from one country to the other, but this size corresponds to a size 6.5. I would suggest to use half or one size bigger knitting needles because this will help you to knit your first row more easily. For beginner knitters, this is very helpful. I will show you two ways of casting on your stitches on the knitting needle. The first is very simple. The second one is a bit more complicated, but I will explain why I prefer that one later on. So let's start then. This tutorial is for right-handed knitters, so you should hold the needle in your right hand and the yarn in your left. This is the needle on which you are going to cast on your stitches. The first thing we should do before start knitting is to attach the yarn onto our knitting needle. One way is to use the slip knot, which is the same as in crocheting. I will show you how to make a slip knot a bit briefly here, but there is a video on how to make one, which you can watch. Start by making a loop with the yarn and divide this loop into half with this strand of yarn, which is pointing upwards. Now we are going to place the needle beneath this strand of yarn, and by pulling both tails we adjust the loop on our needle. We try to adjust it firmly but not too tightly. The loop should slide freely on the needle. I use a simpler method that I will show you right now. Its only shortcoming is that we cannot use this first stitch that we are going to cast on when we start knitting our project. That is, when we finish our first knitting row, we will have to drop that first stitch. Let's call it an eighth stitch. So in order to cast on that first stitch, which is my way to attach the yarn to my needle, I hold both my knitting needle and the tail of my yarn with my right hand, and I place my working yarn, which is the yarn that is attached to the skein, between my middle and my ring finger on my left palm. I wrap it around my index finger and then I place the yarn on my middle finger and I keep it in place with my thumb. In this way you can control the tension of your yarn. And what I do now is to bring my knitting needle parallel to my index finger and go into the loop like this, and when I pull out my index finger I have a loop on my hook, but this loop is not secure yet. If I let go it won't be attached on the needle. I will do it once more. I hold my yarn and needle with my right hand, and on my left palm I have the yarn around my index finger, and I support the yarn with my thumb to keep it in place. I insert my needle in the loop on my index finger parallel to my index, like this. When I pull out my index finger, there is a loop on my needle. This loop is the stitch that will be dropped if I won't use it in my project. However, we need the rest of our stitches in the same way. That is, we hold the needle and yarn with our right hand. I will place my working yarn between my middle and ring finger on my left palm, and the yarn will be looped around my index finger. See? The yarn forms a shape like an X, if you can see it here. Can you see it? When I insert my needle in this loop parallel to my index and pull my index, I have created one more stitch on my needle, like this. Let me pull out my index, and you can see the stitch which is formed on the needle. So let's practice in the same way. I will do it a few more times. I will try to do it slowly, but of course you can pause the video or you can just practice at your own pace. So be careful to insert your needle parallel and form an X, and then if you pull the yarn, you have a stitch on your needle. One more time. Look for the X. Your knitting needle parallel to your index finger. Pull out your index finger and you have a stitch on your needle. I hope you understand how it's done. After a while you get used to it, of course. Just be careful not to cast on your stitches too tightly or too loosely, like this. Now I'm going to undo these stitches, and I'm going to knit to cast on better ones. Our yarn is between the middle and ring fingers. Our index finger is pointing a little upwards to create the tension. Our needle parallel to our index, and that's how we cast on our stitches. Please keep on practicing until you get the hang of it. It's not difficult. If you get the rhythm, I will cast on some more stitches a little bit more quickly, just to show you that after a while you do it without thinking. Like this. See how easy it looks now. Please don't forget that this first stitch, which I used to attach the yarn to the needle, should be undone when we knit our first row, because it's not secured. Another thing I would like to say is that the distance between your stitches should be about the same. By saying distance, I mean the yarn which is between your loops. This should be about the same because this will give you a straight edge, and a straight edge will result to a nicer looking knitting project. I repeat that we don't need this first stitch because it's not secure, as you can see. On the first row tutorial I will show you what to do with it. So this is one way to cast on our stitches, the easy one I would say. Now I would like to show you another way which we use mostly for our ripped edges. It is very good because it produces an elastic texture. For the second way I will be using a longer needle, so you will be able to watch better what I do. But you will continue with the needle which is right for your knitting project, of course. For this method, you should tuck the needle under your armpit. Before I show you how to hold the needle under your arm, I will tell you some things about your yarn. In this method, we use our yarn folded in order to cast on our stitches. So we must be able to figure out how much yarn we should use. Otherwise, if there is not enough yarn to cast on our stitches, we might have to start all over again. So there's a trick for you to estimate how much yarn you need. What you do is to wrap your yarn around the needle 2 times for each stitch that you need. For example, if you would like to cast on 10 stitches, you will wrap your yarn around the needle 20 times. This is because our yarn is folded, so we need twice as much yarn. Of course, you always add some extra yarn just to be on the safe side. So you do it like this. You wrap the yarn around, and in this way you can calculate how much yarn you need for your custom stitches. However, instead of wrapping up your yarn around the needle, you can calculate the yarn you need for one stitch and then multiply it by the number of stitches necessary for your project. That is, you wrap the yarn around your needle twice, and this will give you roughly the yarn needed for each stitch. Then you measure it with the measuring tape. So for example here, to cast on my stitches, I will need about 8 centimeters for each one. You should calculate the yarn depending on the yarn, the type of yarn, and the needle you'll be using for your project. This is important. It's not always 8 centimeters. You have to calculate it depending on your yarn and needle. So now let's go on and show you how we cast on our stitches with this method. I will show you another way to attach the yarn to your needle, but of course you can start with a slip knot. Before, we tuck our needle under our right armpit in order to secure it and cast on our stitches. Now I will show you step by step how to cast on the stitches. As you can see, I have already placed my needle under my armpit. In that way, I can control it more easily. Also, I have already folded the yarn which will be used for my stitches. I will also hold these two strands of yarn with my right hand between my thumb and my index finger of my right hand. I will place my yarn between my middle and ring fingers of my left hand. The stitches are cast on in pairs using our thumb. For the first stitch of each pair, we wrap the yarn around our thumb, insert it in the needle, and we wrap the working yarn around the needle. Then we pass the thumb loop under the needle tip and pull the strand to tighten the stitch. This first stitch is used to attach the yarn to the needle and will be undone when I knit the first row. Both stitches of the first pair will be undone. Now we also use our thumb to create the second stitch of the pair, but we place the thumb in a different way. For the first stitch of each pair, we cross the yarn to create an X. Now we place our thumb here. We keep the yarn in place with our middle finger and ring finger. We place our thumb on the needle. We wrap the working yarn around the needle and we pass the thumb loop over the needle tip and then we pull the strand. In this way we have created our first pair of stitches. As I have already told you, these two stitches will be undone when we knit our first row. Let me show you how we cast on one more time. These first stitches were done a little bit differently. So we place the folded yarn between our middle and ring fingers in our left palm, which is facing us. Then we wrap the folded yarn around our thumb, our raised thumb. We insert our needle under the loop on our thumb parallel to it. We wrap the yarn which originates from the needle around the needle. We pass the loop over the needle tip and pull the strand to tighten the stitch. Our first stitch of the pair is cast on. Now let's cast on the second stitch of the pair. So we place our thumb here, pointing upwards. The yarn is still between the middle and ring fingers of the left palm. We place the yarn on the needle. We wrap the single strand of yarn around the needle. We pass the loop over the needle tip and so we have completed our pair of stitches. These are actually my first two stitches because, as we have said, we won't use these two the previous pair. Once again, it looks a little bit complicated, but when you find the rhythm, you will do it without even thinking. So, the steps are: the needle is under my right armpit and the folded yarn between my middle and ring fingers. I wrap it around my thumb to form an X. I insert the needle parallel to my thumb. I wrap my working yarn around the needle. I pull out my thumb and pass the loop over the needle tip, like this. This is the first stitch of the new pair. For the second stitch of the pair, we place our thumb pointing upwards. The yarn is still between the middle and ring fingers of the left palm. See? Let me do it one more time. I place my thumb pointing upwards here, and then we place the yarn on the needle. We wrap the single strand of yarn around the needle like this over the folded yarn, and we pass the loop over the needle tip, and we tighten. And in this way we have completed the second stitch of the pair. So this is the way we cast on the stitches. I will do it some more times so that you can see how I do it. Of course, you can pause the video or stop it and try to practice. Don't forget that for your first stitch, you always form an X and then you pass the working yarn around the needle and then you drop the thumb loop from the needle tip like this. This is how the first stitch of the pair is done, and for the second stitch of the pair we just place our thumb here like this, and again we wrap the working yarn around the needle and we drop our loop, let's say, from the needle tip. So now, as you can see, I have finished, let's say, 3 pairs of stitches. That is, I have 6 stitches because, as I said many times, the first 2 stitches will be undone when I start my project. Now I'm going to cast on a few more stitches in the same way. I think that by now you will know how to do it. I will just cast on a few more stitches more quickly. just to show you that after a while, when you grasp how we do it, it becomes automatic and you can do it very, very quickly, like this. Although this needle is not very uh, suitable for what I do, I just chose to use it for you to be able to see better. But anyway, as you can see, you can cast on your stitches very quickly. Just please keep on practicing. At first, of course, you will drop stitches, but don't get disappointed. Just keep on practicing. Another thing I would like to say is that you should try to have the same amount of yarn between your stitches, because this way will give you a nicer edge. For example, if my yarn is too loose, it won't look nice. Of course, there is a trick that you can do. You can pull up the loops and make it even, but it's better to be careful. So let me undo these stitches and continue by casting on a few more. So now I have finished casting on my stitches. This is the way we always start a knitting project using one of the two methods. Of course, there are other methods that you can use. Please subscribe to my channel. There will be many more videos on how to knit the Greek way, which is different and I think more easy than the methods used in other European countries and in the UK. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please leave a thumbs up and a comment. It will be very helpful for me to know what you would like my next videos to be about. Until next time, please think positive. Thanks for watching and bye for now.